العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب فإلى ربك فارغب. صدق الله العظيم. Brother Azhar, please.
Thank you, Rami. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا أبو القاسم مصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Session number 3. Shams in the first 2 sessions. And today, inshallah, I've got the opportunity to share with you my research on Surah Takhatur. I said, I think when we were talking about Surah Shams, that these 3 surahs that I've selected are connected to each other. In Surah Shams, the main message was purification of the soul. And I think you will find that this Surah Takhatur alludes to souls which are not, in a sense, purified, because if somebody's soul is pure, is purified, he or she then has a higher marifat. He has a better understanding of what the human soul is about, what is the human soul's purpose, how the purpose with which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it, and the essential poverty of the human soul, our entire total dependency on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So without further general comments, I just want to share my screen and we'll go into the tafsir of this surah, inshallah. So this surah was revealed in Makkah and believed to follow surah number 108, Al-Kawthar, in the chronological order. The surah consists of 8 verses. It severely criticizes the people for indulging in competition over amassing wealth. Not just wealth, but children and supporters, while being completely ignorant about their purpose in life and their potential accountability on the Day of Judgment. So the first 2 verses speak of this delusion of accumulating worldly goods. And the remaining verses 3 to 8 promise that those who persist in such behavior will know hellfire with certainty, with yaqeen. So there are at least 3 narrations on the occasion of revelation, the occasion of Nuzul. Firstly, this surah apparently was revealed about 2 clans of the Quraysh, the Banu Abd Manaf ibn Qusay and the Banu Sahm ibn Amr. Another possible occasion for the revelation is that the surah refers to the Ahl Kitab, or people of the book, specifically the Jews. One tribe among them said, "We are greater in number than the other tribe," and that tribe is greater in number than the third tribe. So this kind of competition preoccupied them for most of their times. A third narration says that the surah was revealed about some branches of the Ansar. Again, a similar kind of theme where they were competing in terms of their numbers, and some of them even said that let's now count our dead to see who has the higher number of people in their respective tribes. So whatever the occasion of the revelation, they obviously don't limit the meaning of this surah and the meaning of the verses. So let's look at verse number 1. From which the surah takes its name. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Al-Hakumu Takatur. Vying for increase distracts you. Distracts you from what? Distracts you from what? Distracts you from your real purpose in life. The Takatur, as I said, translates as vying for increase, meaning competing for worldly gains. And I think we can all relate to this. We've all done this in our lives. Material gains, houses, cars, etc. And also non-material gains, such as fame, image, pride, personality. All these things distract people from obedience to God, remembrance of God, and remembering the akhirah, the hereafter. And then we know in our current times, obviously this surah was revealed 1400 years ago, when the material life was probably not as widespread as it is now. But even now we know materialism is one of the strongest impulse amongst human beings, and you have entire economies based on consumption. Consumption accounts for a very large part of the GDP of the countries that we live in, whether it's the UK or the US, and of course even developing or middle income countries like India are following in the same path. Consumption, consumption, consumption. There's a saying, I think in English, which says people want to keep up with the Joneses. People are competing with each other to have bigger houses, bigger cars, bigger boats, and other material things. And according to the saying of the Prophet, this verse means gathering wealth without right and withholding it from those to whom it rightfully belongs, and hoarding it. Once a companion of the Prophet came upon, when the Prophet was reciting, vying for increase distracts you. And the Prophet said to him, the son of Adam says, my wealth, but do you get anything from your wealth except what you have eaten and finished, or what you have clothed yourself with and worn out, or what you have spent or given in charity? So the Prophet is making a very delicate point, that everyone's share, personal share, how much they spend on themselves from their total wealth that he or she gathers, is only a very small portion. It's the portion that he eats, he drinks, he wears, and spends in the way of Allah. So personally, most of us use very little of our wealth. So isn't it better to increase the share of charity and spend more in the way of Allah? And the more, the better. And I'm sure you've heard of this, that on the Day of Judgment, amongst all the questions that will be asked, two main questions will be, how did you earn the money that you got? Was it by lawful means or unlawful means? And how did you spend it? Again, on lawful things, without extravagance, or on unlawful things. And of course, there is a risk that money that is left behind, money that was left to your children or family members, you have no control over it. So money left to the next generation, how it's spent is not under your control, but yet you might be asked for the way that money was spent as well. Another hadith from the Prophet says, if the son of Adam had a value of gold, he would wish for it to be two valleys. Shows the level of human greed, the hiras in Urdu that we talk about, always wanting more. And then the term al-hakum means distraction, something that stops people from achieving their real goals. The Quran advises about this in other verses. For example, in Surah Luqman, verse number 33, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so let not the life of this world delude you, nor let the deluder, that is shaitan, delude you concerning God. Because shaitan stirs desires and promises and khahishat in you and deludes you. And there's another mention about this in Surah Jathiyah, verse number 34. God says, today we forget you just as you forgot the meeting with us on this day. That is because you took the signs of God in mockery, and the life of this world has deluded you. Verse number 2. Hatta zurrutum tumul makhabira, till you visit the graves. So vying for increase has distracted you till you visit the graves. Visiting the graves metaphorically means death, implying that people will continue to be distracted and not repent before they die. Or it has the meaning of going to the graves in order to, again, compete for the number of people of each tribe, which I talked about in the introduction. So what is the source? In fact, Imam Ali actually says in Najul Balagha, after reciting vying for increase distracts you until you visit the graves, he says, they want to revive the bodies that have become spiritless and the moments that have ceased, those which are more entitled to be a source of lesson than a source of pride. The people who are buried in those graves, instead of learning lessons from it, some of the tribes at the time were using it as a means of pride because it added to their numbers. And those, again, referring to the people in the grave, are more suitable for being a source of humility. Humility in the sense of understanding our essential poverty. Poverty not in the sense of materiality, but poverty in the sense of how much control we have over our lives. So what is the source of vying? Why do people compete for worldly gains when they know from observing their own previous generations, their parents, their grandparents, that this life is temporary, transient. Nothing is permanent. Nothing remains except one's good deeds done for the sake of Allah. So if you look at two things, we're now very much motivated by productivity, which is fine, but what is more productive? Something that is done for this world and which clearly doesn't remain and is gone, or is something which actually remains, which is useful for you in your hereafter? Isn't that more productive? So take a simple example. We talked about zikr yesterday. Zikr is something that will remain. So zikr is productive. And another source of vying is that people think that it may be to counter the feeling of weakness and helplessness that some people have. Sometimes people joke, people who have lack of confidence or a weak faith or weak iman, all issues of the soul. So those kind of people themselves, they want to cover these kind of shortcoming by competing in material gains, competing in image and pride. So there's a tradition from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, which says, no one is proud or behaves arrogantly except for the disgrace that he finds in himself. No one is proud or behaves arrogantly except for the disgrace that he finds in himself. So Allah knows what people are trying to cover within themselves by putting on this kind of outward mask, this outward appearance of having the best designer clothes, the best designer watch, etc., to cover up what they internally feel as a weakness or as a helplessness. Another tradition from Amir al-Mu'mineen says, two things have killed people: the fear of poverty, which forces man to gather wealth by any means, and this demanding pride. And verily, this very unreasonable fear of poverty and vying between individuals, tribes, and societies are among the greatest causes of greed. Because takhatur applies not just to vying for increase, but it's also sometimes applied to the act of multiplying, especially in piling up wealth. Now, verse number 2 and 3. Kalla sawfa ta'lamun thumma kalla sawfa ta'lamun. Nay, soon you will know. Indeed, soon you will know. So these two verses mean that people will know at the moment of death. Now, it's interesting how Quran looks at human life and time. And we'll come to the surah about time tomorrow, Surah Al-Asr. Soon you will know. I think all of us, or some of us who are older, certainly speaking for myself, it does seem as though as you get older, life is very short. It soon goes. And that's what this Quran is referring to, that the people will know very soon at the moment when they have to leave this world. And the repetition in these verses is to emphasize that people cannot avoid the consequences, the outcome of their actions, and that in the hereafter, they will know the real value of the things they prize during their earthly existence. Some scholars have said, in fact, that this repetition is with reference to two levels of punishment. One in barzakh, which is the intermediate stage between our life in this world and the hereafter. And the second, indeed soon you will know, refers to the punishment in the hereafter after resurrection. So there's another tradition from Amir al-Mu'mineen which says, some of us were in doubt about the chastisement in the grave until the time that Surah Takhatur was revealed. And when these two verses of Surah Takhatur were revealed, nay, soon you will know, which indicated the punishment in the grave. And again, nay, you shall soon know, refers to the hereafter. Verse number 5. Kalla law ta'lamuna ilmil yaqeen. Nay, if you knew with the knowledge of certainty, or as it says in the parenthesis, or were you to know with the knowledge of certainty. Meaning, if people knew now as they will know then, vying for increase would not distract them, and they would remember God. They would turn to God at every moment rather than to the world. So if you knew is kind of left intentionally vague to let people wonder at the consequences and the gravity of the possible outcomes to their actions. And this knowledge of certainty is understood to mean the knowledge of that which is certain. And what is certain is resurrection, that we will most certainly be resurrected. At this point, I just wanted to discuss a little bit about certitude and its degrees. Certitude stands for yaqeen, and yaqeen has degrees, it has levels. There's a tradition from Imam Baqir alayhi salam, who says that faith or iman is 1 degree higher than Islam. And taqwa, virtue, is 1 degree higher than faith. And yaqeen, certainty, is higher than taqwa. So yaqeen is the highest level. Then he added that nothing is divided less among people than certitude, yaqeen, complete yaqeen. Most people have some level of doubt. Very few people have complete yaqeen. Then he was asked what yaqeen meant, and he replied, it is total trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, total tawakkul, obedience to Allah, being well pleased with the will of Allah, and leaving all of one's affairs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the degrees that I was talking about, there are 3 degrees which are referred to in Surah Waqi'ah. The first level is ilmul yaqeen. It's the knowledge of certainty. For example, once here, the common example that people use is about fire. So somebody is informed about a fire or sees smoke at a distance, then the level of yaqeen at that point is just knowledge. You know that because there is a smoke, there might be a fire there, but it's not certain. The next level is ainul yaqeen, the eye of certainty, which is when one sees with one's own eyes. For instance, one sees the fire himself. And the third and the highest level is the haqqul yaqeen, the truth of certainty, which means that you then truly realize properly through personal experience. That's when you actually arrive at the site of the fire and you feel the heat of it. This very state is that highest degree of yaqeen. Now, these levels of yaqeen are also mirrored in spiritual development, in your soul's development, where the first level of knowledge is based on what we read in the books, in the newspapers, on the university, on WhatsApp, you name it. We get knowledge from all sorts of sources. So that first level of yaqeen or spiritual development is based on reading, and it's for the general public, for you and I. The second stage of yaqeen is for the pious people, the awliya, who know the reality behind things, who have journeyed on the road of zikr and on the khurbat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who have reached higher. They have a much better understanding of the reality behind things. And then the highest level of spiritual development is in obviously the Prophet and the Aimma. There's another interesting tradition from the Prophet which said that some people asked him about a matter that they had heard about some of the companions of Prophet Isa who used to walk on water. And he said, if their certitude, if their yaqeen was in a higher position, they could walk in the air. That's how the strength of yaqeen could be. And in fact, Allama Tabahi, after mentioning this tradition, adds that everything pivots on the certitude to Allah. And to know that everything that is manifested, everything you see out in the creation, is a manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Imam Ali used to say, I don't see anything without seeing God before it, after it, above it, below it, on the side of it. So therefore, the more the faith and certainty in a person, in the absolute power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more objects in this world will be obedient to him. So the last comment is on this verse is that if you were to know the matter of what will happen with certain knowledge, that knowledge would surely preoccupy you from wasting time on boasting, on rivalry, and on acquisition of material things. Next verse. لَتَرَوْنَّ جَحِيمٍ. You will surely see hellfire. Now this could have a couple of meanings. One meaning is, I swear that you shall see hell, which is the recompense of entertaining and distracting yourselves. Seeing hell will happen to people on the day of resurrection. But the previous verse is conditional. It states, were you to know with certainty, then you would surely see hell. So again, Allama says that the apparent meaning of the verse is that hell can be seen, because it exists already, before the day of resurrection, with the inner eye, or the eye of the heart, the seerah. And that obviously is only available to those who are at the position of certitude. So the vision of that heart will, before the day of resurrection, will not happen for those who occupy themselves with worldly vanities, wealth, material things. Because when they are engaged in that, it would be impossible for them to achieve that certainty that is necessary, that is required. Verse number 7. ثُمَّ لَا تَرَاءُنَّهَا عَيْنَ الْيَقِينِ. Then you would surely see it with the eye of certainty. This verse indicates that they will know hellfire with certainty when they enter into it. Now, this is like the example of the stages of knowing about the fire that I talked about, from smoke to sight and then to actual experience. So there, this verse is saying that on the day of resurrection, they will experience the hellfire when they enter it. There will be no doubt remaining. And then the last verse of the surah, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. Then that day you will be surely questioned concerning the great bounty, the great blessing. Now that day obviously means the day of resurrection, and people will be questioned about what they have done with the blessings that God gave them when they were on earth. So, for example, Surah Isra, verse number 36 states, truly hearing, sight, and heart, all of these will be called to account. Not to mention all the rest of the blessings. People will be questioned about anything that could be called a blessing or a bounty from God. Now, although this verse is addressed to all people, it is particularly addressed to those who are engaged in this vying for increase, in this competitive rivalry to amass worldly things, and were so preoccupied with their Lord's blessing that they forgot the Lord. They were so preoccupied enjoying the blessings, accumulating it, competing about it, having pride over it, that they forgot their Lord. So now, what is something that becomes a blessing? What is a ni'mah, as you would say in Arabic? It's two things. One is that the blessing is something that suits the person's temperament, and the thing is good and beneficial of itself. And this can only be the case if the person uses the bounty or the blessings in a way that brings them happiness and benefit. For example, a person who is naturally generous may be blessed with more wealth, which suits his nature and is good and beneficial. But if he then starts to gamble with that wealth, i.e., starts to use it for a purpose for which it was not intended, that could then become a cause of misery for that person. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created all of us and has ordained that the purpose of our creation, which is to achieve perfection in our iman, in our deeds, lies by getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through servitude. You know, we are all abds, we are all servants of God, and ubudiyat, or servitude, is the purpose that for which we were created. As Surah Dhariyat says in verse number 56, I did not create the jinn and humans except that they may serve me. So this verse clearly says Allah's created us for ubudiyat, for servitude. Now, we could talk about what does servitude include. It could include, I'm not saying it doesn't include the daily responsibilities that we have, the task that we have of running a family, running a household, etc. That's all part of that. But done with the right intention, done with the intention that, you know, even if I'm going for a walk, I'm doing it to maintain my health, and maintaining my health is useful for me to gain knowledge about the things about the Quran, about the Hadith, and so on. So the blessings, both inward and outward, inward, spiritual blessings, outward are physical blessings bestowed by God, cover everything that humans need in order to succeed in their journey. But the way to reach that goal is use these blessings in a way that pleases God and then brings us to that desired destination. That is the meaning of obedience. But if we get caught up or absorbed with the very blessings themselves and forget what is beyond them, we would be then making a huge error, and we would be off the track and missing our destination. That is what disobedience would be. God has decreed that all humans are going to return to him, and he shall question them about their deeds. He will take them to account, and then he would recompense them accordingly. So one's deeds, one's actions in this world are effectively one's way of utilizing his blessings. Because as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Najm, verse number 39, that nothing belongs to God, nothing belongs to man except what he strives for, and that he will soon be shown his endeavor. Then he will be rewarded for it with the fullest reward, that the ultimate end is unto thy Lord. Therefore, questioning about one's deed is tantamount to questioning them about their blessings. How did they use these blessings? Were they grateful or ungrateful for them? And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so generous, so magnanimous, that according to a narration from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, after feeding some of his companions some delicious food, one of them quoted this verse about being questioned about the bounty or the blessing that they just had, that delicious meal that they had. And the Imam said, God is too noble and generous to feed you some food, make it agreeable to you, and then haggle with you over it. Rather, he shall question you about his blessing of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family upon you. Because how do we know what a genuine blessing is? Really, how do we know what is a genuine blessing? For some people, is it money? Is it belonging to a famous family? Is it health? Is it having many children? Is it having a big house? Is it peace? How do we know how to use this blessing gratefully? The answer to these questions is clarified to us through the religion brought by the Prophet ﷺ and further explained by the Ahl Bayt, the Imams from his family. For example, the Prophet is reported to have said that there are two blessings that many people do not make the most of: health and peace. Therefore, when people will be questioned about the blessings, in reality, what they will be asked about is whether they acted in accordance with God's religion. So the questioning then amounts to questioning about the Prophet and the Imams after him, for God made them role models and mandated their obedience. So our journey towards God consists of how we utilize God's blessings. And the proper way of doing that has been taught by his Prophet and the Imams. That is why it's important to follow them. So Ali, I think I'll just finish in a couple more minutes. We may have gone up slightly ahead of my time.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you.
Because as we've heard this, the Prophet is a blessing for the entire kainat. He's a rahmatul lil alameen. And by following him, we know that we'll be on the right track. So I want to then conclude by sharing a tradition again from the Prophet about the virtue of reciting Surah Takhatur. The Prophet said, he who recites it, Allah will not account the bounties he was given in the world, and he will award him such a reward as if he had recited 1,000 verses of the Quran. I mean, for reciting 8 verses, if this is the bounties and the benefit, what can I say? We should recite it every day, inshallah ta'ala. Wa akhiru da'wana, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Please recite Surah Fatiha for all our marhumeen. Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So thank you everybody for joining in. If there's any questions, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Jazakallah khair, Babu. Alhamdulillah. That was really an eye-opener. I think there's so much there and so much for warning and hidayat for all of us. I think it's now open for questions. Please, you can post it on chat or you can ask Azarbai directly. I think probably Rashid coming from US, which is a citadel of consumption and vying for increase, certainly may have a few points to talk about how the society there is so much geared towards, keeping up with the Joneses and trying to, outdo each other. And sometimes most people, some people lose their life in this whole pursuit. Rashid, you have something to say on this, please?
No, definitely every point that Azhar was making, and I was thinking about the same, how we ourselves get so indulged in things. And I think that environment has a lot to do with it. And we have to keep ourselves protected. And it is the environment in a competitive world. Of course, we are extremely thankful for what we have. But the 2 points that hit me really hard is that we are not thankful for something basic, like he said, peace and what was the other point of the way? Health and peace. Yeah. I mean, those are the basic. We are just going after thanking after, car and house and all these things. But those are the main things. If you don't have health or peace, nothing is good in life. So alhamdulillah, I think it's definitely hitting all the right points that we shouldn't be worried about or concerned about. It will happen. और दूसरे यकीन जो बताया आपके, जितना ज्यादा यकीन रहेगा उतना ज्यादा मेरे ख्याल में काम बनते हैं आपके. That's how
absolutely.
Yeah. I think those are the points those are the real takeaways for me.
Yeah, I think in a society where we live, Rashid, in the West, we need to be, teaching our children this importance of having this balanced life, because by fitra, I think we need to succeed. I think we need to balance it with, obviously we need to strive to succeed in world because we need to do that. But I think somehow we need to make sure that balance between successful behavior and also having that spiritual sort of attitude and connection to God and being in that balanced state is very important, I think.
I think bachon ko we should explain to them that obviously when they are young, they're all ambitious, they want to, succeed, which is all good. But unno ko ye sikhana chahiye ki whatever decisions they take, is going to have a worldly consequence and it will have an akhirat consequence as well.
Yeah.
Bear that in mind. Okay, there is going to be a consequence in the hereafter as well. Not just if you think you can do something and get away with it in this life, that doesn't mean you got away with it.
That is true. That is true.
Rizwan has raised his hand. Actually.
Yeah, Rizwan has raised hand. Rizwan, do you have a question or a comment?
Oh, I thought he's saying hello to me. No, okay.
जी, Salak Mazhar bhai, mashallah, very great lecture. I've really enjoyed it thoroughly. बहुत ही eye opener था. I was just wondering on one verse on this, and अगर आप थोड़ी सी उसके ऊपर और रोशनी डालें, क्योंकि I think मेरा network चलेगा था, तो I could not, when the surah goes like Allahakumut takhasur hatta zultumul mukhabir kalla sawfa ta'lamun. I think in English it is like this: abundance diverts you until you come to the graves. No, you shall soon know. That means Allah is reminding us बार बार कुरान मजीद में कि तुम्हें जैसा आपने कहा अभी के consequences को face करना पड़ेगा. He's reminding us. लेकिन फिर इंसान how does he slip away? यानी कि इंसान की जो I think आपने मुझे एक बार अली भाई के घर में बहुत अच्छा समझाया था. I even said to Ali Azam as well कि आपने बहुत beautifully उसको मुझे समझा कि imagination, इंसान जो greed में जो imagination में चला जाता है और फिर वो गुनाहों में अपने इजाफा करता है वो इमेजिनेशन में कि अरे मैं घर ले लूंगा, मैं अगर से ये थोड़ी सी बेईमानी करा, if I cheat little bit or if I do this wrong, I might achieve that. So that imagination, I think वो greed imagination, that is the one.
Multiply हो जाता है उसमें चीजें. It's a multiplier effect.
मल्टीप्लाई इफेक्ट होता है. एंड अल्लाह ताला हमको इसी चीज से आगाह कर रहा है, यानी यही चीज से ही हमको खबरदार कर रहा है कि जो है ना, if you see it with the eye of certainty, then you will know कि हेल क्या है, राइट? तो थोड़ा सा उसके ऊपर आप जी.
या नहीं, वही आप रिजवान सही कह रहे हैं कि भाई पहले तो अपने को यही सोचना है कि हम अपने आप से तो पैदा नहीं हुए ना भाई, अल्लाह हमको पैदा किया है, तो अल्लाह ताला का मकसद क्या है. अब वो क्या होता है कि एक एज के बाद एहसास होता है ये सब चीजों का. व्हेन यू आर यंग एंड सो ऑन, यू आर समझते कि अभी तो बहुत टाइम है, पूरी जिंदगी सामने रखी हुई है. बट सर्टेनली, खैर आप तो मेरे से यंग है रिजवान, बट एज यू गेट ओल्डर यू रियलाइज कि भाई खाली यहाँ पे आके खाए पिए एंजॉय करे यही मकसद है क्या जिंदगी का, या देयर इज अ बिगर पर्पस बिहाइंड इट. और तो वही अपने आप से यही सवाल करते रहना पड़ता है कि भाई जो अल्लाह मकसद के लिए क्रिएट किया, क्या हम उसको फुलफिल कर रहे हैं या नहीं कर रहे हैं, या उसका हक अदा कर रहे हैं या नहीं कर रहे हैं. तो
बहुत जी
वो सवाल अपने से हर वक्त करते रहना है बेसिकली.
बिल्कुल सर भाई, माशाल्लाह. थैंक यू सो मच.
Thank you Rizwan, thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
I think any other questions, brothers and sisters? If you got, please raise your hand, or you can ask Brother Azhar directly. I think we've got a few minutes left. I think Allah doesn't allow, doesn't recommend any competition or doesn't wish for any competition, except for what I remember in reading the Quran. Why? In terms of piety, one should be, vie with each other to achieve a higher level of piety. Yes. So how do you see that? How do you measure? Whether if you're in a competition, I know I've got a bigger house than you, then I know I'm more wealthier than you. But in piety, I suppose, is it subjective, or is it a standard measure? Okay, yeah, I'm more pious than somebody, or somebody is more pious than I am.
अब भाई वो एक आंसर जो मुझे अभी ख्याल आ रहा है कि एक हदीस है, देखो सुने होंगे तुम, मन अरफा नफ्सहु फखद नहीं मन अरफा नफ्सहु फखद अरफा रब्बहु. One who knows himself
knows his
Lord. Now what does that mean? So how that was explained to me is ke marifatul nafs, yani knowing your nafs, is in stages. So one of the reasons the prophets were prophets and the imams were imams were because their level of knowing, their marifat of their nafs was much higher, which is reflected in the duas that they do. जब आप दुआस पढ़ते हैं, whether it's दुआ कुमैल or you read इमाम सज्जाद के सहीफ़े सज्जादिया में दुआ है. तो मारिफत नफ्स जो है is starting by firstly आप अपने आप को assess करो कि भाई मैं खुद ही से पैदा नहीं हुआ, जितने भी मेरे में अच्छाइयां हैं वो अल्लाह की तरफ से दिए हुए हैं. I haven't on my own, मेरे में कुछ नहीं है. I've got nothing. तो जो भी अच्छाइयां दी गई हैं वो अल्लाह के उसमें ही है. और मुझे एक मौका दिया गया है. I've been given time in order to ये अच्छाइयों को और परफेक्ट करते चले जाऊं. तो जैसा मैं उसमें बता रहा था ना भाई, तस्कीए नफ्स, जो अपने आप को बैड कैरेक्टर ट्रेट्स अपने आप से निकालना है, अच्छे वर्च्यूज अपने में ऐड करना है. तो पार्टी का कंपटीशन would generally be to try and remove and minimize as many hidden. कई चीज़ा जो है hidden रहते. अब अपन लोग you know, for example, you know, I might say thank you to somebody when I'm not really grateful, but because it would be wrong not to say thank you. So sometimes जो आपका inner है, you cannot be authentic, because if you are authentic, then you might upset a few people. तो ऐसा कई बार तो पहले आपको अपने inside के ऊपर work करना है, so that you can be how you are inside needs to be how you are outside basically. तो वो पार्टी में वही है कि अपने inner intentions, अपने inner motivations, वो चीजों को clean and clear करना है, so that what people see on the outside is what you are inside. क्योंकि अक्सर जो अंदर की चीजें हैं वो छुपे हुए रहते हैं.
So basically, the zahir should be, the batin should be as good as the zahir.
Correct.
And the divine attributes should be what we should be trying to aim for and acquire those attributes as much as possible.
Correct. Yes, exactly.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So if there are no other questions, inshallah, we will request our brother Azhar to come and see us again tomorrow at the same time.
Two more evenings, inshallah.
2 more evenings, and it will be Surah Al-Asr tomorrow. Is that right?
Yes, inshallah.
For two nights.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you, brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining Al-Nur Institute Quran Tafsir program, and inshallah look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.